everybody. It's Sally with Agility Health, and I'm excited to have Sean Barrett with us here. Sean, please make an introduction.
Hi, Sally. My name's Sean Barrett. I'm an Agile coach at VisaPrint, and I've had the pleasure of working with you and your company for the last couple of years.
Awesome. They've been really great to work with you, and I think we've learned from you guys as much as you probably learned from us, if not more. So Sean has a very exciting story to share in a case study of something called the EVR room, which is the Enterprise Visibility Room. So Sean, before we even go to what is the EVR room, what problem are you trying to solve at the enterprise level?
You know, there had been a long-standing tradition at VistaPrint of our projects moving really slow out to our customers. Creating value and putting it out there was just something we weren't stellar at. Used to be 3 years, and we brought that down, but then we kind of got stuck. Like, we couldn't really get past about the 6-month range for taking our best ideas out to our customers. And we were kind of at a loss. We were stuck as to what to do about it. And we knew there were some big impediments probably related to it, things around high organizational WIP, having a functionally siloed organization, and the effort it took to coordinate across those silos was significant. Like, we saw it day to day as the teams were trying to collaborate with one another. And we heard some people kind of on a side note saying it was tough for them to connect their work to the strategy in the way that we were operating the business. So those were some of the big items in our way.
Awesome. So you realized that there was a problem of demand and capacity to be solved. What attracted you to the concept of EVR, of the Enterprise Visibility Room?
Yeah,
because I know your executives got really excited about it.
They
it was
really
something
did.
That it's like they connected. It didn't feel theoretical, but what was it about it?
Yeah, for me, you know, I'm a very strong believer in the power of visualization. I've watched again and again where people think they understand something, and then when they see it for real in front of them, like, that creates a different level of understanding. And I had hopes that, like, being able to do that for both our strategy and all the work we were doing around it and what the teams were acting on and pursuing, I thought that that might help unlock some of these kind of long-standing problems for us. And I think when you shared the idea of this enterprise visibility room with us, our executives saw the potential in that. They knew these problems too, but we'd just been looking for something that would help us move down that road.
Cool. So I think everybody wants to hear it now. What did you do?
What did we do?
What did the first iteration or the first sprint of the EVR look like?
Yeah, so after we learned kind of about what we thought we might be able to do with it from you, our first thought was just to simply bubble up from the organization, like, what are all the things that you're currently working on? What are the big bucket items that you're pursuing, that you want to have pushed through on our strategy? And we asked them, like, how much of your time are you spending on it, and which parts of the strategy are you working on?
And how did that visualization happen? Can you sort of just visualize was it a bunch of boards? Was it sticky notes? Like, what information did you get from them?
Yeah, we made a little template that had kind of the smallest amount of information we thought we could get by on. And we asked each of those groups to fill one out. It was like a half-sheet piece of paper. And then we filled a whole conference room. Actually, it was a big, like, theater room with these giant, like, whiteboards, foam portable boards. And we just pasted these things one after another until we ran out of the cards. And it turned out we needed like 2 more cases of those boards because there was just so much going on all over the place.
So remind me again, how many people did this room include? Was it how many hundreds?
This was about 700 people that were covered by this kind of drawing out of the information.
So 700 people were actively working on how many items?
400.
400.
All at once. To be done next.
Oh, so this is all in progress.
In progress
or in the
right
next 30.
now, the big bucket items. The
big
really
bucket.
important strategic
So this
stuff.
wasn't small tasks that I'm working on every day. What
No.
you asked them is show me the big stuff that you're working on right now. So I'm sure everybody can understand and appreciate why we are talking about limiting WIP.
Yes.
Because that doesn't seem very balanced. So now what? What was the aha there, and what did you do after that?
Yeah, so that was a big number. We knew we had high WIP. That was a big number even for us, so we were quite surprised. The second thing that was a big surprise from it was we had asked the people what part of the strategy did they think their work was attributed to.
Aligned to.
Yeah, and when the executives walked around and read all the different descriptions of the work, they realized about half of it wasn't actually aligned to the strategy as they thought about it. And so this was a really big aha for us. Not only did we have way more stuff going on than we knew, we also had this misalignment between the executive expectations around strategy and what was actually being done in the org.
I remember you shared an actual metric which was really powerful. You said 50% of the work was not aligned to strategy, and another 25% of the work was not aligned, but the executives were okay with it.
Yeah, there was a part that was sort of off strategy, but there were big things in the business we needed to deal with. Those are probably good decisions. It was the ones that claimed to be on strategy, but just weren't doing things that actually aligned with the strategy as the executives thought about it.
I think that's critical because when you realize and you're trying to grow and transform and innovate as a company and you realize that only 10 to 15% of your capacity is moving your company forward, that's a big deal.
That's a big deal.
That's a big deal.
It was about 10% for us.
Was it 10%? Okay,
Yeah.
so that's a big aha. I'm sure the
Yes.
executives are like, I want to spend more money. So now iteration 2.
So they were like, we got to do something about this, of course.
You got my attention.
Yes. So next time around, they wanted to start from the strategy. Start at the top. Rather than bubble up, they wanted to start at the top so they could say, let's plan what we're going to do to move the strategy forward, and then see how much of that we can actually get done.
Okay.
So it started with articulate what the next outcomes would be to deliver on the strategy, and then have the teams pull that in up to their capacity. So that was one of the big pieces, was we knew we needed a better balance, supply and demand, so that opportunity for the teams to pull up to their capacity according to their estimates, I think was a nice way to introduce this new system to them and let them feel like they still had a reasonable element of control, that it wasn't going to completely overrun their backlogs and their capacity.
Great. I know we talked about the sizing of these items and how do you write them and are they too detailed? And you guys lean towards the hypothesis statement.
Yes.
And did those work for you at this time? I'm just curious for feedback on.
The hypothesis statements were great. The boundary we set for folks was this was going to be a quarterly cycle. So we asked for them to make sure anything they articulated as a valuable outcome needed to fit within 90 days or smaller. Smaller would be great. It's hard to do, but that was the request. And the hypothesis statement describes a particular business capability or something that we want to create, an idea. What business value would be created by it, who the beneficiary would be, and then exactly how would we know whether or not we're being successful with
Measured
it.
by.
Yes.
Yep, it was very powerful.
Yeah.
Great. So now your teams basically are pulling all of these outcomes that you want up until their capacity.
Yep.
So how many did they pull in? Did they pull in 400?
They did not pull in
Okay,
400. We were
good.
very happy to see,
Good.
but they did pull in 48
48. Well, 48.
for 90 days.
For 90 days
Yeah.
across number of teams?
60.
60 teams, 48. You know, let's go with it. Let's see what happened.
Maybe, except they're pretty big cross-functional pieces of work.
Okay.
So I remember we were getting a little nervous as coaches as they were doing this, and we were like, "Oof, boy, kind of uncomfortable." And we asked you, and you said, "You know, sometimes you just gotta let them do it and experience it for themselves." And I think that was really good advice.
Yes. Some teams just need to feel what it means to overcommit, and almost all of them at the beginning overcommit. And until they go through that experience, you can tell them all you want, but it doesn't feel real.
It won't convince
until
them.
they go.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So now what? Now
So we got to the end of that quarter,
Yes.
and they only delivered 25% of those 48.
25% was delivered.
Yes.
Low.
Low. Not a happy number.
Not a happy number.
But they decided they had wanted to take 2 turns at the crank to see if this whole experiment was going to be something we were going to stick with in the long run. So they were like, okay, what do we do with the next cycle that's going to be better so that we get a little closer than 25%?
So you actually did something intriguing at every end of every quarter, the portfolio planning session or the strategy. You asked everybody in the group, continue to do this experiment.
That's right.
Or don't continue. So just tell people about that, because I felt like a lot of people don't like change, Sean, but you eased them into the change and made them feel like at any given point they could say yes or no to the experiment. So that was very important.
It had been a really successful part of our overall Agile transformation strategy up to that point for a couple of years. And so we just stuck with it, even though this was a big thing led by the executives and introduced by the Agile coaches. But we said, hey, it isn't really going to fly unless they find value in it.
Right.
And so we leave the power in their hands to decide to continue or not. And that way, I think it also committed them to really try hard when it came around to the retrospective cycle and say, how could we make this better for you? If you want to continue to do it, help
What are
us.
we gonna
Help
do?
us make it as
Yeah.
good as possible
Your
for you.
input's welcome.
Yeah, it's yours. Yeah.
Okay, so third sprint. They always say third sprint's the charm.
It was, yeah.
So what
So a couple of good things happened. The executives watched, the original 400, the 48. They kind of understood that was well outside the capacity. So that time they said, we're not going to ask for that many. We're going to ask for 20. We still got 35 or so, but when they got that many, they just said, we're not prioritizing all those. We're just going to prioritize the top 16. We think that's more than enough to fill the quarter. if you guys get completely done with all 16,
Then you
go
can
ahead
pull
and
more.
look in the backlog.
Wow,
That's
so
right.
we went from 40 to 16.
To 16.
Okay.
And the teams kind of swarmed around that, and they had learned a little bit in the previous quarters that they could put more teams on a single piece of work than they had originally understood. They were better at cross-training and picking up skills in other functional areas than they had ever imagined, and they liked it. And so they got really excited about that, and they all got involved in the pulling of the work. It wasn't just their representatives in the room anymore. It was
The entire
full
team.
teams sitting there for a few hours, gathering the context of the business outcomes that they were trying to deliver, and then they pulled those in, talking to one another all the time. The POs, the developers, everybody who was on the team, the analysts were there, and they were saying, we need some of these skill sets. How many do we need? How big is this piece of the work? What's that going to look like? And kind of back and forth, they would 2, 3, maybe 4 squads of this skill set, and 2 or 3 of those, and several of these support people over here. That was what they needed to actually take the work to done. That was a really awesome thing to watch, because we were just on the sidelines. We were just watching this happen, and it was beautiful.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
You said something that I don't want people to miss, which is the idea of swarming.
Yes.
And because I remember one of the objectives from the EVR, what you guys were hoping for, was that teams would be more cross-functional and learn from each other instead of
Yeah.
very specialized skills. So what does swarming mean? Can you explain that a little bit more to people?
Yeah, so I think traditionally we would have said, there's a functional area and there's things to do there, and a team works on the things that are in that backlog, and that's all they do. And swarming was the ability to bring more teams to bear on one item, even if it's from outside that functional area. And that was really the key. And sometimes that took a little bit of training, but often it was like a week or 2. And in a
Really?
quarter, even a week or 2 of training was sustainable if we could then put, another 100% of capacity on this really top important item from the backlog. Yeah.
So that was the 3rd iteration, and the team, how many did they get? 12?
They got, out of the 16,
Out of
they
the
delivered
16,
10.
They delivered 10.
So 65%.
65% delivery. That's better.
Yes.
That's better.
Definitely
than
better.
25%.
Yes, much better. There's still plenty of room to go, I think, in terms of better understanding what our real capacity is for this type of work. But these were much larger outcomes than the 13 they had delivered the first time. They were probably 3, 4, 5 times the size of many of those, with a lot more people focused in a narrower area.
Almost like
through that
tribes,
swarming.
right?
Big tribes.
Big tribes with multiple squads focusing
80,
on a
90
specific.
people.
80, 90 people. Okay,
Yeah.
great. So those are true epics. The room looked different in the last, and so can you talk about the whole transition? So the room was transitioned, and it now looks a little bit different, and I think that's a success story. So
Yeah, after that last iteration where it was an experiment, the company decided, all the participants said, hey, we want to keep using this as our main mechanism for connecting our strategy to our operations. And so we moved the whole operation into the strategy team. They set up some people to take care of it as facilitators and to start using it as their main tool for interacting with the org. It's this beautiful, big whiteboard presentation right outside of our elevators. Half the company walks by it in and out multiple times a day. And I actually think that physical presence right where people can just glance at it,
See
walk
it.
up to it, see the whole picture, understand what's been agreed to as an organization collectively, the executives, the leaders. There's no questions anymore about which one is most important. It's right there in black and white. It really helps.
yeah, and I think I don't want to underestimate what you said about putting it so front and center that
Yeah.
everybody has access to it.
And we see people coming to it all the time.
Yep, and engaging with it.
Bringing their partners over, bringing their teams over, talking about the work, making decisions day to day, and then they can just self-serve and go. That's great.
Awesome. Great. So what's next? What's next for VistaPrint and EVR and just aligning strategy with execution?
Yeah, I think excellence in execution is really going to be the next thing that we're interested in. We know we've got these really capable teams. They're now aligning around the strategies. Before, they were very cross-functional, and our executives kind of took to heart all the things that they saw. The moment that really caught me was when Chris Connors, who's our head of technology, came out of that first big planning day, and he said, wow, I was watching those teams take all those cards and hand them out to every single team that was involved. Some of them had 15, 16 different teams all involved in one piece of work that they wanted to get done. And he knew the burden of that collaboration was going to be incredibly high. He's like, I don't know how we're going to do it, but we have got to fix this functional silo problem. And so I think that's where the conviction came from, was being able to see it in action. And those executives said, okay, this time around, what we're going to do is we're going to try to reorganize out of these functional teams and align with these big pillars of our strategy. So make these long-term, stable, cross-functional teams whose sole purpose, that segment of the
Deliver
strategy.
value around value streams.
Try to minimize the dependencies between those groups.
Yeah.
I don't think we can eliminate them at this point,
Yeah.
but really draw it down as far as we can. And some of them are pretty independent. We're pretty sure a few of them have all the skills they need. They don't need anybody else outside that group. So our expectations are pretty high that that burden of cross-functional collaboration is going to go way down.
That is a great story, and we have to always end every case study with some metrics.
Uh-huh.
So thinking about where you were
Yeah.
and where you've arrived, how would you compare the metrics before and after?
Yeah, so our big slow flow of work, we think we were running at about half a year to get our ideas to our customers before, and afterwards we're moving at about every quarter. So we cut that close to in half. We had really high WIP. We went from 400 top work items to 48, now to 16, and that's starting to feel like somewhere right around in there is probably about the right amount to have active for our org. The EBR created for us this visual of a single prioritized enterprise backlog that we'd never had before. And having clarity on exactly what the priorities were across all of the functions was a really helpful thing. And that in and of itself alleviated a lot of that misalignment and confusion about which thing came first. The executives and their leaders kind of wrestled out, what are those things first? And then they shared it with the organization, and that made it easy for other people to operate smoothly.
What was the importance of the role of leadership in all of this, Sean?
Tremendous. It never would have gotten off the ground without their support.
Yep.
This is such a fundamentally big change to how we were operating. Saying no to all those other things we could be doing takes a lot of permission and fortitude and, honestly, authority inside the company. It's very hard to say no if 5 levels up, somebody's saying, yes, do this.
Yep. But it was up until your CEO and your entire executive group was involved in this.
I love Trinka. She's our CEO. She's sitting in the planning session with those teams saying, look, you need to leave yourself some slack space.
Yes.
Stop pulling work beyond your capacity. Leave yourself some room. She said it over and over again to them. And finally, she just kind of took the action on herself to say, hey, this is it. We're not giving you a larger set than this. Try to just get this done.
Awesome.
That support, that permission to just focus and limit what you're doing is huge. Kind of needs to come from the top.
Yep, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Sean.
Thanks.